Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, the EOTEC GEO UNOOSA UN Spider webinar. We're going to get started in just a moment. People are still joining, but thank you so much for joining us today. We're really honored and pleased that you made time to be with us, and we look forward to a great conversation today. Fantastic. Why don't we get started and at least get moving with our introductions and say hello. My name is Erin Martin, and I'm part of the Secretariat of EOTEC DevNet, which is the Earth Observation, Training, Education, and Capacity Development Network. It's a mouthful, but we go generally by EOTEC. And as I was saying, we're very honored to be organizing this webinar today with our colleagues from the GEO Knowledge Hub and from the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs UN Spider Office, which is the disaster management platform. The idea for this webinar came from EOTEC's communities of practice, particularly the flood working groups who have been talking about ways to really strengthen the connections between data providers and the data users, and particularly in the context of flood and drought disasters. How can we really make sure that the data that's being provided is having an impact? So that's how we got here today. For those who may not know, EOTEC DevNet is a network of networks that is working globally through communities of practice to try to extend the reach of Earth observations capacity building. I'll tell you a lot more about what we do, and we'll highlight some of the tools. I have two colleagues here from the Secretariat today, Christian and Martina, and they'll help highlighting some of what we do, but we'll get to that later. We just want to emphasize we really hope this discussion today will be very practical, and we're going to have some audience interaction toward the end so that we can hear from you and get your ideas and suggestions about what practical solutions and practical steps we can take to strengthen this bridge between data providers and users. So, but before we get going, let me just pass quickly to my colleague Paola De Salvo from GEO to say hello.
Thank you very much, Erin, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am Paola De Salvo. I'm the coordinator of the GEO Infrastructure and the GEO Knowledge Hub. I'm here today with my colleague Felipe Carlos, the developer of the GEO Knowledge Hub. The group on Earth observation has been working very hardly in the last many years to promote data sharing, but not only data sharing, but also knowledge sharing. And when we say knowledge sharing, we mean applications, because we are aware that data alone is not enough. In the case of disaster, or in the case of also prevention and mitigation, what we need are applications that do respond to specific issues. And within the GEO Knowledge Hub, which is a centralized digital library, where knowledge provider, whoever is working on a different application, is able to share openly the existing application, and for users living in countries that experience similar problems are able to learn, benefit, reuse those applications, and customize them for their own country. So we're super excited to be able to partner with EOTEC DevNet in this exercise of this webinar, but also in the future. And obviously, we're available for any question you might have about the GEO Knowledge Hub. Thank you very much, Ellen, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Paula. We're very, very pleased to have Laurent Cesarin from UN Spider as our moderator today. Laurent has spent a couple of decades working in the UN system, particularly in UNOOSA and UN Spider. He is also vice chairman of the CIAS Working Group on Disasters, and he brings a wealth of experience in disaster management, both from a policy point of view and also a response point of view. So Laurent, we're so pleased that you're able to join us and be our moderator today, and we'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Erin, and welcome also from my side, I think we are already over 70. That's great, and more joining. It's a pleasure for me, of course, having worked on this topic for many years within the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, to moderate this webinar today, and especially in a way diving in together with all of you into the discussion after the quick presentation. So as you have seen on the agenda, I wanted to maybe give you a bit of an overview of the objectives of this webinar. We all know that Earth observation capabilities are growing continuously. We have more and more access to data, both very high resolution, and so on. But still, many organizations, especially within the disaster management domain, are struggling to turn this data into action, to even have access to the data very often, and to apply such data in real-world disaster management scenarios. So what we want with this webinar is to try to address those barriers that might exist, be it technical, institutional, or financial, and see what we can do about it, and have a dialogue, understand also from your perspective as users, as practitioners, what are the problems, how we can address them. So we want to make sure that if you are a stakeholder within the Earth observation, hydrology, disaster management community, that you're joining this webinar today, we equip you with some practical strategies to reduce these barriers and to more effectively apply satellite Earth observation data in your disaster management related efforts. We also want to make this a collaborative space, so we want to hear your feedback, your priorities, your input, and then what you think of what those barriers are and how to reduce them. And we want this to be an as interactive as possible dialogue. We start with three quick talks, presentations from the panelists, from our colleagues, and then we will move into an interview style panel after that. So let me introduce briefly the three panelists today. We have, first of all, Thelma Chavez. She's the coordinator of applied risk research at El Salvador's Ministry of Environment, and she has over a decade of experience applying Earth observation and satellite data to strengthen early warning systems, to monitor natural resources and assess climate risks. Our second speaker will be Robert Emberson. He's the Associate Program Manager of the NASA Earth Action Disasters Program. In this role, he administers NASA-funded projects and supports disaster response by providing satellite data and insight for stakeholders before, during, and after disasters. Please mute yourselves if you are joining now, so that we don't have any interference. Thank you. Our third panelist is Morvapula Mashalane. He's a good colleague we work with a lot. He comes from the South African National Space Agency. He's a remote sensing scientist there, specializing in disaster management, especially in flood response. He represents also the UN SPIDER regional support office we have in South Africa, and he's a project manager for the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters also. I think they can also add more information about themselves as they will go through their presentations, but from my side, this is a quick introduction to the three panelists and speakers. And with that, I would like to hand over to Thelma to take us through her first quick presentation. You have about 5 to 7 minutes, Thelma. And then, of course, once we have all the three presenters covered their slides, then we will go into our discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Thelma.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello to all. Well, since I have just quite 5 minutes, I would like to share a brief overview of what El Salvador is doing when using meteorological and satellite information to manage information associated with floods and droughts, and also how our team has been working to create simple tools to help local teams to use and add value to satellite data. First of all, The two main institutions that were to monitor, produce information, and communicate information related to extreme events are the Observatory of Threats in Natural Resources, which is part of the Ministry of Environment here in El Salvador. And the second agency is Civil Protection. Both work together, and I think that is part of the success that we have been experiencing in the latest years, because the observatory has a clear command. They have to monitor natural phenomena, produce forecasts based on technical data, and share that data to focal points within different institutions. The main one is civil protection. Civil protection is the one that transforms that information to the population in order to communicate what actions need to be done to reduce impacts and to reduce losses. They decide, they transform all these reports that we provide them in a simple manner to tell the people what they have to do and when they have to do it, and which are going to be the most affected areas. And we communicate with focal points every single update we have. The second thing I would like to share with you is how we use and how we integrate satellite data into our analysis. We have been using for many years the data that is registered from our ground stations. Also, we have a network of local observers that provide information about what is really happening in our territory. And we have some other information that is from different users, from media, or from other institutions. We combine this information, and we also perform some other analysis based on satellite data. And a good experience, we had it in 2022 with the tropical storm Julia. When we have satellite data that help us to identify and quantify the flood-affected zones. We combine the satellite data with ground information that allow us to improve our position and also to perform cross-validation and help us to support a more comprehensive and evidence-based risk management. Has been a challenge, but I think we have strengthened the way we perform analysts and also the way we provide information to our population. Finally, I like to share with you one of the tools we have developed in the latest years in order to promote the use of satellite data. We know that local teams, they want to add value to all the information we are working on. And maybe we could move to the next slide. And that is why we have been thinking how we could improve and take these ideas to develop a data cube. Unlike some other data cubes that rely more on automatations, which have like some scripts where user can run some routines and develop some products, we design this tool based on our technical user capabilities, who often have limited programming skills, basic GIS knowledge, and high operational workloads. And that is why we, at the first phase of this tool, we forget about those scripts, and we start to provide some tools in an easy way. We know that what they need is like some tables because they understand statistical indicators, or also the trends. They like to see how everything is changing. So we start to providing some kind of products such as the temperature trends, some ways for them to compare in an easy manner some vegetation indexes, detect changes between 2 days, analyze land covers and how the different covers are distributed into an area of interest for them to perform some other impact analysis, and many more. This is just like an example of how El Salvador is using satellite data to perform some analysis to approach this information to people and to expand the use of satellite data to improve risk management in El Salvador. I think for now I will stay here, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Thelma, and I'm sure we will have questions, and as we go into discussions, we'll have follow-ups on this for you. Moving to the second presenter, and for those of you who maybe joined meantime, the second presenter will be Robert Emberson, who's Associate Program Manager with NASA Disaster Program. Robert, over to you.
Thank you so much, Laurent. So I'm here on behalf of NASA's Disasters Program, and I'm really excited to kind of meet with you all and talk with you all today about how we can support better use of satellite data for flood analysis. Just a brief note on what the Disasters Program is. We're part of the Earth Science Division at NASA, and our role is to support the advancement of disaster science and understand how we can use satellite data to better inform community-based and local, state, and federal level decision-making, as well as international for disaster planning. We have a kind of close connections to like ground-based and local communities, but the core elements of our program are three things. So the first is supporting applications research. So that means projects that specifically address decision-making needs and advancing the science specifically of disasters, and floods are a big part of that. I'll talk more about that in a second. We also have what we refer to as the Disasters Response Coordination System, which is a team of experts at NASA whose role it is to provide data and information and support to active disaster response agencies within the US and globally as well. And so that in that role, they provide flood data during an active flood response event, for example. Again, I'll talk a bit more about how that looks in a couple of slides. And then finally, we have what we refer to as the Disasters Partnership and Learning Platform, which is an overarching a sort of computing infrastructure that allows us to share data with our partners, both internal to NASA, but also externally as well. And I should stress at the outset that all NASA data is free and openly available. And if you find there are elements of NASA data that are not so accessible, then we really need to hear about that, because that's something that we need to fix. So those are our three core elements. So if we go to the next slide, please. So just to give a bit more depth about how we work in the flood space, I'm happy to expand on any of these points. We have supported for many years extensive research and applications focused on supporting flood resilient communities. And so what that means is using satellite data to assess where the floodwaters are, predicting the potential locations of floods based on forecast models, incorporating rainfall data from satellites to understand this. We've developed a strong set of projects that show leadership in now analyzing where floods are using a novel series of satellite tools, for example, using synthetic aperture radar, as well as commercial satellite data and multispectral sources. This has also allowed us to generate products that can determine not only the extent of flooding, but also the depth of flooding in some locations as well. And so we've been a real leader in this space, working with experts from around the US for many years now. Our current focus and our current portfolio of projects supporting flood analysis is really to think not just about what the hazards of flooding are, but also how that impacts communities. So thinking about how the interconnected footprint of flood impacts is impacting, for example, transportation infrastructure, the connectivity of different systems, as well as the kind of local scale resilience of communities and what this really means for disaster planning operations as well. So really intersecting the satellite data with the policymaking and the decision-making needs at state and local level, as well as internationally as well. So that's our focus for the kind of the resilience and applications portfolio right now. So if we go to the next slide, please. And I'd be very happy to talk more about this in the kind of discussion segment, but just to give you an example of the array of different tools and information that is provided. An example, for example, this example is from the response support that the team provided for the Brazil flooding that was early last year. And so This is arrayed from left to right in approximately kinds of data that were available from either very short time or kind of near real time with the flooding, all the way through to several days afterwards. And you can see that we have a series of different products that have been developed, for example, to assess very kind of short order impact, flood extent, and then moving towards higher resolution, more higher fidelity analysis of the flood location. I'm using commercial satellite data, and that would be available in 1 or 2 days, all the way through to SAR-based analysis of flood depth, which is a much more derived product that we can use to assess the impact of a flood. That was then available several days afterwards when the synthetic aperture radar pass was made available. So there's different parts to this, and all of these pieces fit together to provide a kind of multi-area, multi-observation picture of what is happening with flooding. And the two key things that I want to emphasize is that, number one, this data was provided to a number of regional partners to support their decision making and almost immediately after the products were produced. And so we're actively working to make sure that data makes its way into the hands of those who need it as soon as we can. But also the key thing here is that there are a number of different products emphasized on this slide. And one of the things that I would like to kind of think about is how we can inform the community of the different use cases of these different tools and these products at different times during a flood event, for example, and how they can be used the most efficiently. Not all flood products they don't all mean the same thing. They're available at different timelines. They have different quality. And so there's a lot of trade-offs here that, you could say all of these things are different flood products, but they all have different use cases. And I think understanding how we can exploit those is a real key need in this space. So I'll say thank you for your interest, and I'm happy to answer questions, obviously, but looking forward to the discussion. So I'll pass it back. Thanks, Laurent.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. I actually noticed one point in one of the slides you mentioned flood depth products were developed to provide additional nuance. And I just wanted to say that in many situations, many users out there are even more interested in the depth than they are in the extent. So it's not necessarily only for, I would say it's not additional only, but it's an important aspect that maybe we want to look more into and how to develop more accurate products in that sense also. Thank you again. And with that, we move to our next and last presenter, Morvapula Mashalane from the South African National Space Agency. Morvapula, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Morvapula. I'll be giving a brief presentation on how in South Africa we have been tackling disasters using Earth observation. Next slide, please. So our applications here in South Africa, we focus mainly on 3 types of disasters here at the Space Agency. We develop products on drought, the fires, and also on floods, where we link each and every product to a phase of a disaster within the disaster life cycle. So we have which includes risk modeling, mapping of areas that are prone to fires, mapping areas that are prone to flooding. This happens at a national scale, and this information help us assist us in identifying areas that are most likely to be flooded in the country. We delineate floodplains, and we also assess the land use, land cover in such areas. All this information we acquire from. On the preparedness part, we do forecasts, which is in the form of weather, which is undertaken by our partner sister organization, South African Weather Services. And also we do flood detection and also the very same on a flood risk layer. And then we also do in situ fire, in situ floods mapping. Flooding is occurring. undertake the process of mapping the water overflow, which areas are being affected, so on and so forth. Actually, even now we had flooding disaster in one of our provinces, and that work we've been carrying it out since the previous weekend. Currently, it's undergoing. It's continuing. So we also do damage assessments, which also informs future planning. We assess the damage that is caused by flooding at the household level. Each and every house that was inundated, each and every house that was structurally affected by the flooding, whether there has been mudslides, whether there has been landslides in such areas, we assess all that and then provide the information to the authorities. Next slide, please. Now, the challenges that we often face is that there is disintegration of data based on institutional mandates. So what does this mean? This means that within different government entities, government agencies, each agency would have GIS and remote sensing data set that is produced to meet their own mandate. For example, the Department of Transport would have all the roads, the Department of Energy and the electricity provision entity would have its own data on their electric infrastructure, on the road infrastructure, and so forth, while other institutions like your statistics will have information on demographics, socioeconomic data, and so forth. So all these data sets are sitting in multiple organizations instead of sitting on one or being accessible through one dashboard. So that is a bit of a challenge that is there, because when you get the data, you often find the data in bits and pieces here and there. While it would be better to have all the data set in one platform where one would be able to assess the risk and also the damage in the full extent. So another challenge is the education and exposure. So this doesn't necessarily mean or doesn't necessarily talk to the educational qualification, but in terms of citizens and people being aware that in the areas in which they reside is actually an area that is prone to flooding or some form of a disaster. This is mainly because some disasters may take about 20 years to return, that some may take even 50 years or more. Find that they only happen once in that long period. So in some cases, you find that the resident has been residing in a particular area, and then they've never experienced any form of a disaster until it occurs. So in such cases, you find that the resident isn't aware of such a disaster impending to happen in the area. So that is one of the key aspect which we believe that if it's tackled properly, it will assist us in saving a lot of lives. Because when the disaster actually happens, it often catches people off guard, and that is why, and some people don't even know how to react to such a disaster because probably they have never experienced it in a very long time, or they have never experienced it in their whole entire life. Lack of adequate incentives, this talks to exactly that. So because people are not very much aware that are within their surrounding, maybe because they only happen once in a while, people are not very much incentivized to put mitigatory measures. This talks to the authorities or the organizations that are within that particular area that is at risk, because they have never experienced such an issue. So in areas where disasters occur quite regularly, those measures are being put in place, and people have an incentive. People can take on insurance to cover their belongings. People can subscribe to Earth observation platforms, which informs them of forecasts, which gives them, they can even watch the news and see how the weather will be in their area. When they hear of a impending storm that is coming, they take measures. So yeah, another leg which we find is that the issue of funding. This one largely talks to the access to very high resolution satellite imagery. So in South Africa, we have rivers that are very small in diameter. They have so apologies about that. So in South Africa, we have, in majority of the rivers that cause flooding within our settlements are very small, for about 10 meters, 15 meters. And these are the rivers that people reside very close to. So in assessing this kind of conditions, we need, and we use very high resolution imagery, which comes at a very high cost. Sometimes that you may find that the imagery is actually at much higher cost than when you get a drone to fly over the area and capture imagery, and then you assess that. Another limitation is big data. Computing facilities, things such as data cubes, they are very much desirable, where all these different data sets that is from different entities, one can integrate. So some computing there, whether it's machine learning, and then you will be able to get some more insight. So another challenge which we often faces the limited translation of research into real life applications. So the research, you find that we conduct research, we have outputs in terms of manuscripts, and you will have a geospatial layer that you produce, or a product, but that product is not operationalized. So find that the research remains research. It doesn't go on to be an operational system, and that also becomes a headache. Unmatched expectations between data providers and data users. So also flash floods happen at a very specific time period, and they're very short term. So you find that by the time the image is acquired, the flood has already subsided. And then what you can do in that case is to do damage assessment. However, if we found a way to match the user expectation with the data providers, it will assist, because then we would know that when we acquire satellite imagery, majority of the satellite imagery that is acquired at the right specific time. Next slide, please. Now, on the adoption as to how to address these challenges, one, integration of EO data and systems from different institutions. That means that when there is an alert, one can be able to see the settlements that are within the areas where the alert has been issued. And from there, the settlements that are at risk of flooding or whatever disasters can be identified, and then an alert issued to those specific individuals residing in that area. That way, it assists, because people get to be alerted way beforehand, and they can take whatever measure that they have to take so that their lives are safe. Simplify information, focusing on impact and actionable information, moving from stating that so much millimeters of rainfall is expected in an area to say what is going to happen or will cause flooding here and there, what the strong winds that are there are going to result with trees falling, so on and so forth, so that people know that what is coming their way is going to cause this kind of damage. Therefore, these are the actions that they should be able to take. Insurance, we have to incorporate insurance business, and then so that people can insure their assets, and that also assist with that incentive, because often insurance companies would even issue an SMS to say, beware of an impending hail or whatever. Please ensure that your asset, whether it's a car, whether it's your any other movable item, is being put in a safe environment. And also the insurances assist with inspection of your properties to make sure that they are well maintained. Allocate funding and draft agreements on the initiatives for data sharing at affordable costs. This is an initiative such as the Disaster Charter, which is assisting very much, where in cases of disasters, data, satellite imagery is provided for free. And then in some cases here in South Africa, what we did is that we adopted what we call single purchase multi-user, which essentially means that as an entity of government, we purchase satellite imagery once, and then we will be able to provide that same imagery to another state organ. So, which means SANSA doesn't pay for imagery, and then the Department of Science and Technology comes in, pays for the same imagery again. Accelerate computing facilities, move more towards applied research in what is being researched can be moved or should be moved to operationalized. And then obviously we have to continue with user engagements. I think I took too much time. I think I will end the next slide, please. This is my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of the three quick presentations. Obviously, this is just a small sample, small but important sample of data and application provision and also use cases that we have seen. And now we can move to a bit of a Q&A with the panelists as a first, maybe for the next 25 minutes or so. And then, of course, as we mentioned, we will open the we will open some Slido link for all of you participants to post your questions or comments for us as panelists also to answer or discuss. So and I think that the slides at one point, Morvapula, you had these challenges slide, which I almost feel like we could put back on the screen a bit if colleagues from EOTEC can help us with that, because that might actually inform some of the issues we want to touch on now as part of the discussion. So that was an interesting summary that I thought would be good to have on the screen a bit more. And then, but let me address the first question that goes to you all, to all three panelists. And that is based on your experiences, I mean, both as a provider and as a user, what are the top 2 or 3 barriers to ensuring that flood and drought managers are able to use and act on Earth observation data and information? So just starting with Thelma, what do you think, what would be your answer to this?
Okay, well, thank you. I'll say, but based on my experience, I have identified like the first obstacle, the operational overload and the limited resources our agencies have to perform an additional analysis based on geospatial based on satellite data, because I mean, like integrating this Earth observation after they have to collect file data, receive the reports from the observers, from different users, create reports, create forecasts, and I mean, integrating this satellite imagery analysis, it is performed as an extra burden, sometimes more than a solution. And also that is linked to the second obstacle I have identified, and is the skepticism that exists regarding the data accuracy. Because even though you present them like some researches that have been done and the ways that it's being used and like the range of accuracy that this product has, they feel like because they don't have that data from file, they have to do an extra effort to validate what they have, it's being delivered to them. And finally, and we have experienced when developed some new tool, is the lack of this starting point and guidance. I mean, we have like all these needs that have been presented to us, and we know in some kind of way we can provide some solution based on satellite data, but I mean, we don't know where to start. And it's really good to have someone that had that previous experience and that they can share it with us, just to help us to organize the road and the step we have to take in order to deliver the solution that our users are looking for. And I think I will say with those three main obstacles as I identify as a user.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And I'll swap order here, Robert. Apologies. Before I go to you, I'll go to Morvapula as another user practitioner. And then looking at the list of challenges, there may be 10. I mean, what would be your top 2-3 problems? Again, similarly to what I asked before and what Telma responded. From your perspective, what would be those top 2-3 challenges?
Thank you, Roland. So my challenges would be latency, one, especially looking at floods, disasters. So it also talks to the unmatched expectations between data providers and data users, that the decision makers often require the information as in now. And often, I think at most, you moving from a satellite image acquisition to the map or value add, or that image being in the hands of the user, takes about 3 hours at the best case scenarios. So you find that during that period, the decision maker is being a bit frustrated with waiting for information that isn't forthcoming, which they are in need of now, so that they can make actionable choices or decisions. The second one, I would talk to it as in technology how, in the sense that in most cases, you find that people are comfortable doing things in a particular way. And when you bring a new method, technology that achieves the same objective, they turn to fall back to their default, one would say, setting. So that, for me, seems to be a huge challenge, because even when some are aware of the new products that are there, just because they maybe are not well vested with how those generated, they tend to be very much cautious when they use the data, which talks to what my colleague spoke to about the accuracy and reliability. So the accuracy of it is often linked to how the data set was generated. And if they do not understand how the data set was being generated, then yeah, it becomes a issue of data dissemination. Also, it's something. different users require data in different ways. Some require a simple PDF map, some require through a web mapping services, some require it through, they want the actual image instead of getting a map. So yeah, that also brings in a bit of a challenge, because then you find that they want a particular way, and then the provider is providing it in a different way. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And now to you, Robert. And obviously, we are focusing here on flood and drought related events, disasters, and the question was about how about those disaster managers dealing with flood and drought situations? How can they use Earth observation or act on Earth observation based information? And as a provider of data, as an enabler of application solutions, from your perspective, what would you think those top two, three challenges are, or what did you meet in your interaction with these categories of users?
Sure, and it's a really good question. I want to support everything that the two previous panelists have said. I think they made really good points. I will emphasize the challenge of latency and the timeliness of product availability as being a major issue. I think this is structural in some ways, in that the timeline over which devastating floods happen. Some large-scale floods occur over days or even weeks or even longer, but many, many devastating floods are small-scale flash floods. And we simply don't have the ability to image those from an observational standpoint from orbit. And I think the satellite timelines, even if they are able to capture that, might not be available within the timeline that matters. So we simply have to start looking instead at forecast-based analyses and predictive tools for how river flooding might happen. But there is a challenge in terms of interpretability of that data in comparison to the Earth observation data itself. So there's certainly a challenge in timeline of just the structural type of floods that we can observe and provide imagery support for. And I will add that is added to by the fact that the satellite coverage for particularly flood depth is often on the timeline of several days rather than immediately one day afterwards. We're still, I think, looking at multiple days afterwards. Some of that will be, I think, reduced when with the advent of more radar satellites. NISAR from NASA and the Indian Space Agency is launching very soon. We have another Sentinel satellite in orbit now that we did last year. And we have a lot of commercial SAR data. So I think that will help that challenge, but it's still going to remain in many ways, I think. One of the other things I wanted to emphasize, though, is that from a data provider perspective, there is a challenge between the operational versus the non-operational nature of different agencies. So flood responders typically are disaster response support teams that work 24 hours, 7 days a week. And often the people that they can call about data availability are maybe working on a more regular timeline and not a kind of like operational timeline. And that means that what is typically available is only the routinely generated products that are consistent and any kind of like on-demand processing for specific events. We've certainly found that we like to make a point and sort of, it's a common theme seems to be that a lot of disasters occur on a Friday at 5 p.m. because then it's something that you can't necessarily see as a scientist until the week after. So transitioning from that science perspective to the operational perspective has been a challenge, and it's one that remains. So I just want to emphasize that as a big issue. Yeah, and I think we are working all the time to reduce the barriers to the use of data, but I still think that there is an element of it's easy to be able to, in some cases you can access data, but it doesn't mean that you know what that means and how to use it efficiently. And so the use case and illustrations of like how we can train people to do that capacity building of flood data use still remains, I think, a gap, and it means that we're still, I think, lacking some of that information during flood responses. So yeah, really, I think those key 3 points.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting. And now I will use my advantage as a moderator to insert maybe a 1-minute story, because I think what you, Morvapula, mentioned about the cost of the very high resolution data, the latency, the delay, and sometimes people resort to drones because of that challenge. But again, we are here to discuss the value of Earth observation from space. So I have to tell you, of course, this story very quickly. 10 or probably 11 or 12 years ago, there was this major landslide in Freetown in Sierra Leone. And some of you might know 900 people died there. I mean, it was heavy rains, the whole valley went down, and then it affected one of the suburbs of Freetown. At that time, colleagues in UNDP, in the UN Development Program, actually had drones in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, available. We also activated the charter. We took some, we asked some of the high resolution data providers at that time to take some shots, despite the 80% cloud cover. 10 hours later, we had an image from Digital Globe that somehow, those 20% of no cloud in the image were exactly over the area affected. I call it the Earth observation miracle. 10 hours later, we had that image. We could map the landslide, the impact. The drone data was only ready 2 days later. By the time they deployed, they flew it, they mapped it, they mosaicked it. We had an image in 10 hours. Sometimes there is a value still in using the satellite imagery, although we all recognize these challenges you mentioned. And I know those who love drones in this group now will not like me for what I said, but I think it's important to point these examples out that are, that happened, in fact, and we as practitioners experience them. Another question that maybe I ask you to briefly address, if you can give us any examples of successes and or failures on coordination. I mean, how do we minimize this fragmented response, these delays, these challenges of coordination among us? And again, I would look at the US users, Telma, Morvapula. If you have any examples from your past experience of how such work was done successfully, or where you had a failure that you would like to point out, so we learn from it and try to address it as a as a lesson learned. So Telma, over to you first.
I remember the experience we have with the storms Amanda and Cristobal in 2020, when the mobility was quite difficult, and we have been receiving so many reports of impacts regarding the floods. We were starting to use these technologies, and from some scripts, we identify some areas, and something that helped us to improve what we were, the product that we were delivering was that NASA Servir provide us also another product similar to the one we were working on, because they have also provided us some trainings before to be prepared to this kind of situation. So it was not just the previous training we had, it was just like in the right moment, we start to provide like a solution where could be the affected areas. And at the same time, this expertise institution provide us also their analysis, and we compare and we validate what we were doing. And in that way, we verify where we have to improve our analysis, and then we integrate it with the rest of the data, and we could provide a better product to our users to identify which were the areas we had to prioritize in order to implement some rapid actions. And I think the key in this experience was that there was a strong coordination and continual communication between focal points, and also the training we did have before, because it was not like in the emergency, they told us how to do it. We have previous training, we implement the tool, and we compare the results in order to provide a better product to our users.
Thanks. Those are very good points, especially being prepared, ready, being trained so that you know what to do when something happens. That's definitely the success story part. Morvapula, over to you if you have any such example. I know you've been busy responding in the context of the charter also to some drought disasters in the last years in your region. Anything else, anything you would like to share on the success and or failure side?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so On the success of the coordination, an example was I can use the 2022 Kazan flooding, which sort of created so during what we have in South Africa is that when a disaster occurs, we formulate a group. This is a group of different organizations, social partners, police, SANSA is there to provide maps of the actual flooding, weather services to forecast disaster. So for the success story during the 2022 President flooding was that we were able to get new imagery and also create maps which we could provide to the group on a very acceptable rate, and the response on the ground was well informed through our maps. People managed to assist those that were vulnerable on the ground. We created a lot of maps covering the largest area possible. Even most of the ground workers who were there were at some point guided only by our shape files of locations where we're sending them to say, go to this area, that area, that area, and that area to assist the people who were there. So for us, that model, we continue with it even today. So, but just to add something which is a bit outside of remote sensing, is that here in South Africa also, we have one mouthpiece when it comes to warning provisions. So, which means that it assisted us to eliminate false reporting, where in this age of digital social media, people can generate false imagery, false videos, which they spread around, and they say there is a disaster here and there, creating panic, or when there is a disaster and they create counter material which they flood the whole social media about. So here we have one mouthpiece which everyone listens to, which assists very well, because when that mouthpiece talks, everyone else listens and everyone else moves, and then they do not listen to all other noises which may be coming from the falsehood. I just wanted to mention those two. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you very much. And Robert, I'm sure you have a lot of experience supporting flood response in the US, and you would assume that the resources are there, everything's working perfectly. But do you have any examples of maybe things that could improve, or well, I wouldn't call them necessarily failures in that context, but anything that you could share from your experience?
Sure. I think it's particularly important to think about, as we mentioned, that the way in which flood impacts different economic sectors. And I think often the decisions that are being made by response agencies relate to, for example, how they can deploy resources for quick response, but like the longer term recovery questions relate to, where are the particular economic sectors that are impacted. And I think our understanding has evolved to start thinking about how we can support applications that not only assess the current state where the floodwater is, but also what that means for impact. And communicating that to response and recovery agencies is typically helpful to better round out the way in which they think about these things. So we know that they can, just giving them a picture of what things are right now is only half of the battle. We want to make sure that we provide a more sort of comprehensive analysis of how things can look in the future as well, and what that might mean for impact. So this is one of the ways we're shifting towards to kind of address those needs. I think in terms of US-based response, obviously there are multiple layers of different authorities that can be involved. And so that means federal, state, and even local. I think some of those groups, if particularly as a science agency providing data, we can't work with every single group necessarily. We just simply don't have the support and team size to do so. So for us, it's determining who we can work with, who can then create a larger kind of umbrella organization. And in some cases, we know that there are groups with greater capacity to kind of reach out to ground level team members. And I think that's one of the things that's been a core lesson for us, is that satellite data is not necessarily helpful to someone who is on the ground trying to find, search and rescue in between floodwater. What it is helpful for is the team way above that, who is determining where to deploy resources to do that, and how they can find out where the overall large scale impacts are. And so I think determining exactly the kind of point of entry for us has been really critical, and that in the US typically sits at the federal level, although we've working closely at state and local level as well now to make sure that we have built capacity at those local levels so that they can use our data during kind of, I guess, during our event response. Often we have hopefully built the capacity for them to use it without necessarily a lot of like feedback and hand-holding from the science teams. So yeah, just some thoughts.
Thank you. And again, I see some questions coming in also in the chat, so I encourage you all to, as you listen to our discussion, post any questions there. We will try to structure them and answer them during the interactive part, and as the Slido comes up also, you will have the chance to post your other questions. But maybe another quick question, and I challenge you all, dear panelists, to answer in 30 seconds, not more each, is we have a lot of cases where major disasters get a lot of international Earth observation data support and publicity for that matter. And of course, that includes also the International Charter support that is focused on major disasters. But that's about 10% of what's happening in terms of disasters around the world every year. So these localized, more local disasters get much less attention, and also probably a lot less support in terms of data access and high resolution providers providing free data and so on. How do we scale the response in such situations? How can we address these smaller disasters that require, in the same time, as much support, and there are a lot more of those, but they are not visible enough and supported enough? If you have any quick comments, again, 30 seconds, no more each. Thank you. Thelma, starting with you again.
I think it's one of the challenge, because when we go more local, we acknowledge that we will find fewer technical and technological resources. So what they will be asking from us is not the image itself, not like the vector, not the raster. They will be asking for tables that they can understand and provide them information, because they need to take actions. So I think the best way we can deliver some insights from satellite data is to improve regional and national capabilities for them to provide that kind of data at a local level, because they know the way locals work, and they know how to communicate better in order to promote a rapid action that needs to be implemented. So I think it's more like, consider that they have fewer capacity to perform an analysis, but they really have that need to have accurate information, or some information that is being updated all the time for them to implement and adapt to the situation that they are facing. But I will say that we can support them when we improve the regional and national capabilities, because they will provide that information that they need.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Robert, over to you this time. What's your 30-second reaction?
I think the challenge for small-scale disasters is that we often look at the dollar value or the economic value from disasters, and that's often scaled without context. So very large disasters with billion-dollar impacts may be in countries where there is an enormously large economy, where that shock is potentially more absorbable. At small scale, local disasters can be extremely devastating to local communities, and particularly in countries where there is less capacity to respond to that, but even if the economy may be smaller. So small does not always mean small, I guess, is my big point here. And I think one of the things that we could do better is to underpin our analysis of flood impacts with a kind of a human vulnerability context, like where are the communities who have the greatest vulnerability to flood, and what is that likely to mean for the impacts? So I really think that having a more human-centric approach to understanding impacts rather than simply, and we've been talking about economic impacts, but like it's not the entire picture. There's certainly more there that we can think about. So I would advocate for that.
Thank you. And Morvapula, what do you think?
Thank you. So yeah, the human-centric approach is the best. So here we also have a similar problem. So what we want to implement is that this it's an authorized user kind of a thing where you have a centralized system that you have different people all over the country to provide or to feed information into that. When there is a localized flooding that maybe is not reported on the news or even on the local media, that authorized user can simply just take an image, take a picture with their phone, and then when they do that, the system logs in the location, and then they submit that information onto the system, and then it issues us with an alert. Because for us to know if a disaster is happening, we would normally rely on the weather forecasts and subsequently formal media, mainstream media, one would say. But if those are not covering the local areas, the localized area, then such information sometimes doesn't even get to those who need to know about it, like us. So hence we thought that would be another way of saying, let's take a bottom-up approach. Citizens that we authorize access to the system will be the ones who assist us in providing that information, and then we can vet it as it comes in, and if it is worthy of any action that we have to do on our part, then we continue with that particular action. And then if we find that the data is not adequate enough, we'll request for more information and also then come to a determination of whether to recognize it or not. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And with that, we come to an end of this discussion among the panelists, and we want to open the floor for all of you to start asking questions through the Slido, or also have our colleagues from EOTEC DevNet help us go through the questions that were posted. Before I hand over, I just wanted to point out the question that Albert Kettner put in, referring to the flood depth that we mentioned earlier, and he's asking us also to comment on what other elements of flooding would be important to look at or monitor as well. And I see also a good answer from Trevor already on that. So if others want to answer to some of these questions, that helps us collect input also from you. And those are very good points, I think, that Albert and Trevor raised. And then I would like to also highlight the question from Birgit, because that's very important. We need a lot of point data collection. It's not enough to just use Earth observation data. And we've been talking for years about, more weather data, more data points for weather data collection, using personal weather stations for that, not these very expensive $200,000 professional weather stations that are WMO compliant, etc., but putting up more data points to collect data in real time in unpopulated areas and everywhere. And in that context, not only Earth observation, but also other satellite technologies, such as satellite communications, but also GNSS receivers around the world deployed, will play a role to help us collect more of this data going forward and have access to this data in real time through IoT networks and satellite connectivity. So I'm very positive that time is coming now. But that's a very important point Birgit is raising. With that, sorry for taking a bit more time, but over to you, Erin, and colleagues on managing maybe the Q&A with the audience. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Laurent. And thanks, Telma Moropula and Robert, for your amazing presentation. So much great information. I wish we had another hour to keep going and talking. There were a couple of comments in the chat about citizen engagement and local observers, and some very great points made about that. And Telma, I believe you mentioned that in El Salvador, you have a network of local observers who provide data. Are you familiar with how that came about? And can you talk a little bit about how practically those networks are mobilized and trained and brought into the conversation and the data sharing?
Yeah, yeah, sure, a pleasure. This idea came a long time ago because we identified that it was not enough to have on-ground stations to evaluate what is happening on territory. And since we are moving forward to provide impact assessments, it is required for us to verify in territory from human perspective what is going on there and how these floodings are affecting them. So that idea came to improve our assessment in impacts. And in the forecast we will be presenting. Well, the way we work is like they report us, like in every single event that happens, they tell us how is their territory. It doesn't need to be affected. They just have to update what is going on the territory they have assigned. Also, it is important to mention that if there is like a change in paradigm in the way we perform some analysis or the way we will work in the coming days or in the coming years, they always receive a training, and we give them follow-up to verify they understand the importance of the information they are providing to us, and to work and strengthen the commitment to do it frequently, even though they are not being affected in certain periods of time. So that's the way we work. Like we train them, we receive reports from them, and we keep on adapting on technologies or methodologies to integrate the information they provide into our analysis and evaluation of impacts.
Robert or Moropula, do you have any similar experience or anything you can contribute about the citizen engagement, local observers? I wonder if South Africa, you might have something similar.
Oh, thank you, Erin. So in South Africa, for the disaster management, there are field workers that work, but they do work largely for the disaster work or disaster authorities. They don't necessarily feed the information to us here at SANSA. Hence, we would like to start using such individuals so that they can also provide some information to us so that we can support even those remote local communities better. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Robert, also you touched on capacity building and talked about doing capacity building in between disasters, or in the quiet periods, if there is such a thing anymore. Could you elaborate on some of the very specific things that you're doing, and maybe the other presenters would also have some comments on that, but interested in what very specifically capacity building means in the context.
Sure. I think there are lots of ways to approach this, but I think the best thing to say is we typically have to target our capacity building to very specific individuals within a given organization. I think there is a barrier to use of Earth observation data, and I think we recognize that the gap between scientists often and members of the public is large. So I think the maximum good we can do is often by working with GIS specialists and those who have existing expertise with the tools so they can quickly use those test systems, and then leverage the sort of scientific understanding. Like that tends to be a lower barrier to do that. Now, that does mean that the organizations we have larger kind of impact with typically are those that have the capacity to have GIS specialists, and that doesn't include everyone. And so we've also tried to work with larger enabling groups who might have kind of broader connections to kind of on the ground folks to do that. But it really is, I think, tailoring our capacity building to what we've sort of starting to refer to as specific personas, kind of the archetypical individuals within an organization. That might be the GIS specialist or their kind of like tactical decision-making team lead, for example, and tailoring our approach towards those individuals is pretty key. And then I think, as I say, oftentimes it's working and establishing kind of longer term connections. And I think where we've had the most success is in places like Rio de Janeiro, where we've worked with the city government teams there for many, many years and developing kind of like co-developing solutions that will support their needs. I think that oftentimes is not easy to do. That long-term engagement, co-development process takes time and energy from both sides, and it often requires like a long-term commitment that is not always possible for like short-term disaster response. So bearing that in mind, we're also trying to think about how we can develop, I guess, training courses that can be used at any given time. And I will point to, this is outside more generally for NASA, the NASA RSET program, the Applied Remote Sensing Education and Training Program, which provides an extensive amount of training courses to enable people to use different NASA data sets and apply them to different needs, is certainly a resource that we point people to if there is maybe a lower level of GIS expertise within that group. So yeah, there's a lot of different resources we've tried to work on, and there's no perfect answer, but I want to emphasize that I think human connection and connection to the individuals involved is really critical. We don't cold call people. We work with groups to make sure that they are kind of understanding who we are, and we're not trying to like come in at the last minute to like support this. We want to make sure that there is a standing capacity to do this work. And so again, there's lots of different pieces there, but that's some thoughts at least.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Wonderful comments. So why don't we move to our Slido? We just have about 12 minutes left, and we asked the first question about barriers and bottlenecks, and there's quite a bit of interesting information here. Just for the record, we will go through and synthesize all of these comments. So we would really love to have some of your feedback there. Just trying to see if there's anything in particular that we would like to highlight, or if somebody in the audience wants to call attention to a particular topic, I invite you to open up your mic and share at this time if you'd like to. You can maybe raise a hand if you'd like, so we see you. Okay. No, feel free at any point in the last few minutes if you'd like to raise your hand and make a comment or add something here. I see issues about interoperability and integration. That was something that came up, and lack of researchers and dedicated research on impacts of flooding and drought. Interesting. From my point of view, it seems like there are a lot of researchers, but of course that's where I work. So I'm sure if you're more on the user side, it seems like there might not be so many. But I see Christian has a hand up. Christian, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hello. I'm from Ecuador, Christian Vallis. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. Yes, one of the most important barriers for us, especially from the National Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, is when we are passing through between seasons. You know, the models are not so accurate as we needed. So in these cases, sometimes not only the other institutions in the state, especially the institutions that promotes the political publics in Ecuador, we have a lot of problems because the people don't believe our forecast when we have thrown in a border in between two seasons, especially when we are from the wet seasons to the dry season. The models try to, I don't know, are not so accurate as we need. So to me and to us, for the meteorology institutions, is one of the most barriers, because if we don't have too much accurate models and outputs and also warnings, the people, and especially the people in the field, start to lack or start to don't believe in our forecast. So to me, is one of the most important barriers. So thank you for the chance, and thank you for to share my comment.
Thank you, Christian. There was a comment in the chat also asking about the ability to think more about forecasting and the use of EO for forecasting floods. Maybe I can ask our panelists to comment on your point and that point about forecasting.
Yes, especially in that case, when we are in the border between two seasons, wet season and dry season, the models start to, I don't know, overestimate some outputs. So that is one of most barriers for us. But we are working on that, putting more ground stations to try to add to the models, especially our mesoscale models. So I don't know if the panelists has one answer for that.
Yeah, Robert, or Morpulwa or Telma, would you like to comment on that or share any of your perspective?
Sure. I think the large-scale climatic models, and particularly kind of like downscaling for flood mapping and flood forecasting, has typically not been something we've done a lot of work in for NASA, partly because like we are not an operational forecasting agency, and we look to groups like the National Weather Service to do that, and they have a river forecast system that works at a US scale. There are others globally who are doing kind of similar things, and I would happily kind of drop some of those links in the chat. I think one of the challenges is that there is there are a lot of players in this space. I know that Google has also developed an AI flood forecasting system recently that has been deployed in various places. And I think I'm really encouraged to see one of my colleagues from NASA Severe talking about flood in comparison, like intercomparison of different tools, because understanding how to use these various different systems is pretty critical. I will also add that flash flood still remains challenging. Like I think large scale flooding is more and more doable at river scale with forecast data, but due to the complexities of urban environments particularly, and the way in which flash flood can impact urban environments being one of the critical areas, I think even the forecast models that we're seeing deployed by kind of operational teams still struggle to provide kind of maybe the kind of block by block useful information that we might want from some of these cases. So I'm going to kind of defer to others who know more about this specific forecast element than I would, but I will happily drop some links to the chat in the chat for some of the reference points.
Yeah, and Morpulwa, you specifically mentioned your interaction with the Met Service in South Africa. So I wonder if you might have a comment here.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, unfortunately, also, I think my answer will be similar to Robert's. Most of the forecasting is done at the weather services. So we take what they provide with us and provide us with, and then we integrate that with our satellite imagery. That was basically, yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Sorry.
Great, thanks so much.
I would
Go
like
ahead,
to add to what they have commented. In those specific moments, I think that the characterization of our territory is something, it's crucial, because at the end, what we want to do is reduce losses, reduce affectations to our populations. And if we have improved in previous times, the characterization of our population, even though, I mean, it's a model. It is not, I mean, it's not going to be certain all the time. But if we know how our territory behaves based on the integration of different sources of data, the information we will provide based on impacts to our population is going to be more accurate, even though a forecast for tomorrow or the next week is not as I mean, it's not the best one we could provide, but the integration, the characterization of our territory based on the integration of different sources of data will help us in those moments to provide accurate information to our population and to the decision makers at different level. And in that integration, I mean, one of the sources is satellite data that help us to characterize it much better.
Great, fantastic. So we've just moved to the next Slido slide here and about recommendations. And we're really keen to see what you've got here. It's not too late to provide an answer. In fact, this will be open for 2 days if you want to share it or think about it or come back and add something. This will really help us in formulating some ideas and suggestions from out of this webinar. So you can see a few things on the screen there together. Data fusion, that's a great thought. Bringing the communities and the supply chain. I think about it as a supply chain of information and bringing all the people and agencies involved there together. That's a great way to think about it. If we scroll down, I see there's something about the general public and disaster management and sensitization there. So those are all great points. So I think we're just about at the end. Is there anyone else who has a burning question? Any of the participants, audience members who has a burning question you'd like to ask quickly before we wrap up? Okay. Had your chance. It's your last chance. I think we can say thank you. Say thank you also to our colleagues at GEO. I don't know if you want to put some links in the chat about the Knowledge Hub, and so that people know where to find more information about the really important work that GEO is doing. But I think Laurent will pass to you to close us out with great thanks.
Thank you very much, Erin. I will try to wrap up in 2 minutes. You do have on the screen a number of events that are coming up where you can also get in touch with some or all of us. Maybe one that's missing, and I should have done that, is the Living Planet Symposium here in Vienna, where we are also as UN Office for Outer Space Affairs based. So if any of you are coming to Vienna for the Living Planet Symposium organized by ESA, come over and talk to us. We are here just across the road from the venue of the LPS. I think a lot was mentioned here. It's very important that the question remains online, and so you can provide more input. I would hope we can capture all the comments, the questions that were raised also in Slido, because there's a lot of very high value points there made by all of you, and we want to follow up or continue this discussion also offline. So please feel free to reach out to all of us, the organizers of this webinar. If you know Paula or GEO colleagues, if you know colleagues at EOTEC DevNet or ourselves at UN Spider, feel free to drop us an email, follow up on any of these points discussed. I heard a lot of interesting points about the difficulties accessing the very high resolution commercial data, about the latency issue. That's still an issue with Earth observation from satellites, sometimes the information overload, but also other problems about unmet expectations. And we do have to tackle those. Very often in our work out in the field, as UN Spider, we visited 60 countries in the last 10 years. We meet people who gave up hope that Earth observation can help them, because they might not be aware of all the possibilities. And so these expectations are sometimes not necessarily, how should I say, based on an informed or on full knowledge of what possibilities Earth observation and satellite imagery offer. So we need to address those points. I also heard that information in disasters is needed yesterday, and we don't have time to wait hours. So we hope that more constellations and more imaging satellites coming up in the next years will try to alleviate that a bit. And then, of course, we will keep talking and hopefully organizing such webinars to address these issues with all of you in the future. With that, I would like to thank again GEO, EOTEC DevNet colleagues, the panelists, Thelma, Robert, Morvapula, for your time, dedication, and investment to join us. Again, looking forward to hear your feedback and your input. Thank you again, EOTEC colleagues, for putting this together. I saw at one point we almost reached 100 participants online. Others can always watch the recording. Have a nice morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, and thanks again for joining us.